So, hello everyone, welcome to CoreVet. So, from now onwards, we will be starting our osteology. Okay, from now onwards, we will be discussing about the osteological segment of the anatomy, in which we are going to study all the bones in an animal body. Okay, so before starting description of all the bones, I will let you know that there are certain things that you should know or you should remember while writing a description of a bone. Okay. So first of all, you should follow these steps while writing a description of a bone. That first of all, you should know what is the positioning of the bone. How many surface are there in a bone? कितने surface हैं bones में? How many angles are there in the bone? If any, means there are certain criteria that obviously there would be a positioning of a bone. There are surfaces in a bone. There may or may not be angles in a bone. There may or may not be borders in a bone. Okay. Obviously, there would be certain joining positions also in a particular bone. Okay. So when you combinedly write all these things, no, you will lead to formation of complete description of bone. Okay, when you write these following things, no, you will give a complete description of a bone such that the examiner impression would be great also. Okay, so you should write always an answer in a particular sequence. Okay, and you will also write how many muscles and cartilage are there attaching in a particular bone. Okay, so now as we are starting, so we will be firstly discussing about the scapular bone, which is this bone. Okay, we will be knowing about the positioning, angle, borders, and all the joints that a scapular bone form. We will also knowing about the differences that amongst the scapular bone possess among the veterinary species. Okay, so let us start the lecture. So what is the location of the scapular bone? It is cranioventrally. What is the direction? It is downward and forward. It extends from the third thoracic to fourth thoracic and to the distal end of the rib cage. Let me explain it to you in the diagram itself. So first of all, you should know that this is the what? One second. This is the cranial or anterior aspect, which is facing towards the head. Okay, this is the anterior or the cranial aspect. The aspect which is facing upward, okay, upward is known as what? Dorsal aspect. And the aspect which is facing downwards, okay, it is what? The ventral aspect, right? And the aspect which is facing towards the backward or towards the pelvic side, it is what? The caudal or the posterior aspect, okay? These aspects you must be clear with. Okay. Now coming on to the scapular bone. So scapular bone is present how? Cranioventrally. Means it is facing towards the cranium and to the ventral aspect. Okay. So that's how the position of the scapular bone is also. You can see it is facing cranioventrally. And how it is placed? It is placed obliquely downward, means it is facing downwards and forward. Okay, so that's how it is positioned. Okay, you can see clearly in the image that it is going downward and forward also. Okay, now coming on to the next thing, that it extends from the third to fourth thoracic. Okay, third to fourth thoracic, right? And also extend to the to the distal end, distal ends of rib cages. Okay, so these are the distal aspects of the rib cages. So it is also extending towards what? The distal aspects of the rib cages. Okay, I hope you're clear with the positioning of the scapular bone. Okay, now coming on to the surfaces. So a scapular bone bear two surfaces. There are two surfaces in the scapular bone. What are they? First one is the lateral surface. Second one is the medial surface. So before starting the surfaces, let me tell you how these surfaces are seen. Okay, so consider this as a cross-section view of a body cavity. Okay, and here's the scapular bone. This is the scapular bone. Okay, so the surface of the scapular bone, wait a second, the surface of the scapular bone which is facing outward, okay, outward means away from the midline is the lateral side, okay, or the lateral surface. So this surface that I am marking, this surface, what it is? It is the lateral surface of scapula, right? And the surface, and the surface which I'm marking now, this surface will be what? Your, this surface will be your medial surface, right? There are two surfaces. So the surface which is facing towards the midline is the medial surface, and the surface which is facing outwards or away from the midline is the lateral surface, right? So I hope you are clear how the surface are seen in a cross-sectional view. Okay. So on the lateral surface, there is an scapular spine, okay, which divides the lateral surface into two halves, which is what are they? The supraspinous fossa and the infraspinous fossa. How? Let me show you. Consider this to be an scapular bone, and this is what? The lateral surface. Okay, this is what? The lateral surface. Now, there is a spine. There is a spine. This is the spine. This divides the lateral surface into two halves. You can see this is the half one, this is the half two. So the half which is here is the infraspinous, okay, and the second half is your supraspinous. So these spinuses are also what are they? These are the depression. These are what? Depression. That's why they are called what? Supraspinous fossa and infraspinous fossa. Okay, these aspects are clear that there are on the lateral surface there is a spine which divides the surface into two halves, the half one and the half two. So the one half is known as the infraspinous fossa and the second half is known as the supraspinous fossa. Okay, now the spine is curved. Okay, it is curved at middle. The spine is curved at middle, okay, and there is a tuber of scapula or a scapular tuber that is present on the spine. At the middle aspect of the spine, there is a tuber of scapula or the scapular tuber. Let me show you how it is seen. So this is the lateral aspect, okay, lateral aspect or the lateral surface, okay. Now, what I had told you that there are two fossas. You can see this fossa that I am highlighting now. This fossa, this depression or this fossa is what? Your supraspinatus fossa. Okay. Now the surface that I am marking now, the fossa or the depression that I am marking now, this. Okay. So this depression or this fossa is what? The infraspinous fossa. Okay. And what I had told you also that there is a spine that divides, right? So this is the spine. This is the spine that I am highlighting with the green. Okay, so this is the spine, and at the middle, what I had told you that at the middle of the spine, this is the tuber. What is this? Tuber of scapula, right? This is the tuber scapula that is present in the middle of the spine. Okay, now coming on to the ratios, what is the ratio of these fossas in different species? So in the case of this ox, the ratio of supraspinous to infraspinous fossa is 1:3. In the case of the horse, this ratio is 1:2. In canine, it is important to note that these are the equal. These fossas are equal in size. Okay, so the ratio is 1:1. In the case of the swine, the ratio is 1:0.8. Okay, so please remember these ratios. Okay, Now coming on to the medial surface, which was the medial surface? This, the surface which is facing the towards the midline, right? So talking about the medial surface, so there are no spine in the medial surface. There are no spine in the medial surface, and this surface bears two rough areas. Okay, so if we talk about the medial surface, right? Consider this as the scapula, and what is the surface it is? It is the medial surface, right? So what I had told you that in the case of the lateral surface there were a spine, right? But in the case of medial aspect there is no spine. Okay. In spite, there are two rough surfaces. There are two rough surfaces that are present on the spine which give accommodation to certain muscles. What muscles they are? They are serratus cervicis and serratus thoracis. Okay, there are two muscles known as serratus cervicis and serratus thoracis which are attached to these two rough areas. Okay, so the serratus cervicis comes and attached to this part. Okay, serratus cervicis, and this part gives accommodation to serratus thoracis. Okay, from here the serratus thoracis are. And what are the aspects? This is the cranial side. Okay, this is the cranial side. This is the caudal side or the posterior side, right? So this is clear that there are two rough areas that are present on the medial surface. One is the serratus cervicis. One area gives accommodation to serratus cervicis, and the second area gives accommodation to what? Serratus thoracis, right? And there is also a shallow fossa, means a shallow depression is present over here. Here on this side, there is a shallow depression. A shallow depression is there, which is known as what? Subscapular fossa. Okay, so the two fossas that were on the lateral aspect were what? The supraspinatus and the infraspinatus fossa. And the fossa that is present on the medial aspect is known as the subscapular fossa. Okay, I hope these parts are clear. Now coming on to the borders. Now we will firstly discuss the borders. So there are three borders that are present over in the scapular bone. The first one is the anterior border. Okay, the second one is the dorsal border, and the third one is the posterior border. Okay, there are three borders that are present in the scapular bone. Okay, so what will be the anterior border? Consider this to be the scapular bone. Okay, so anterior border will be the one which is facing what? The cranial side. Okay, the cranial side. The border which is facing the cranial side will be the anterior border. So this border is convex in shape and quite thin. Okay, now the border which is facing the dorsal aspect. This is the dorsal aspect. Okay, the dorsal aspect. So the border that is facing towards the dorsal aspect will be what? The dorsal border. It is what? Convex. It is what? It is convex. It is rough. Why rough? Because there is an attachment of subscapular cartilage. Okay, there is what? Presence of an articular cartilage known as subscapular cartilage. And the posterior border, which is facing what? The caudal part. This is the posterior border, which is facing what? The caudal part, right? The caudal part which is faced is known as the posterior border. Okay, it is thick and convex in shape, right? Let me show you in the image also that see, this is the what? This is the medial view. Okay, medial surface. This was the medial surface. What I was telling that there is two rough areas. These are the two rough areas for insertion of what? Serratus muscles, right? And there is what? A subscapular fossa also, right? Now what was we are discussing that on the what? What we were saying that on the dorsal side. There is what? There is a scapular cartilage. Okay, there is a scapular cartilage, right? Okay, there is a scapular cartilage, right? On the dorsal border, there is presence of an articular cartilage known as the scapular cartilage. Okay, now coming on to the angles, how the angles are formed. So there are three angles now also. That first one is the cranial angle, second one is the caudal angle, and the third one is the distal angle. There are three angles that are present in a scapular bone. So consider this as the scapular bone. Okay, so this angle is the what? Cranial angle. If this is the cranial aspect, this is the dorsal aspect. Okay, this is the posterior aspect. This is the ventral or the distal aspect. So there are three angles. One is the cranial angle, second is the caudal angle, and third one is the distal angle. Okay, so there are three angles. So how the cranial angle is made? It is made by the anterior and the dorsal border. How? You can see that here. This one is what? The dorsal border. This one is what? The anterior border. So these two borders leads to formation of what? The cranial angle. Okay, I hope this one is clear, right? This is clear, right? Now the dorsal border and the posterior border lead to formation of what? The caudal angle, right? It is made by what? The dorsal and the posterior border, right? And it is comparatively thick and it is comparatively thin. Now coming on to the third angle, which is the distal angle. So the distal angle is facing towards the ventral side, okay, the distal aspects, and it bears two things. One is the tuber scapula and second was the glenoid cavity. So this glenoid cavity is a shallow articular surface. How so? Let me tell you. Consider this as the this is what? The distal angle. Okay. So there is a shallow articular surface. This is the what I'm marking. This is the shallow articular surface, okay, known as glenoid cavity. What is the function of this glenoid cavity? It gives an accommodation to the head of humerus. So it will give the accommodation to the head of the humerus. Okay, so this is what the purpose of this glenoid cavity is. So let me tell you also about the tuber scapula and the glenoid cavity. So I had mentioned about the glenoid cavity that it forms an articular surface. It is an articular surface which gives the accommodation to the head of the humerus. Now talking about on the distal angle also, there is presence of what? The tuber scapula. On the spine, it was what? Tuber of scapula, and it is what? Tuber scapulae. Okay, so both are different. Okay, now discussing about the tuber scapula or the supraglenoid tubercle. Why supraglenoid tubercle? Because it is this is the glenoid cavity. So it will be present just above, means supra, above to the glenoid cavity. So that's why it is known as the supraglenoid tubercle. Okay, so it is a small and present in the cranial aspect of the glenoid cavity, and it gives an accommodation to what? Biceps brachii muscle. Okay, it gives an accommodation to what? Biceps brachii muscle. Okay, so the biceps brachii muscles originate from this area. Okay, this part is clear. And there is a small projection that is present on the medial aspect of the tuber scapula. Means the tuber scapula were on the cranial aspect, and just medial to the tuber scapula. This is the tuber scapula. So medial to the tuber scapula. This is the tuber scapula. Okay, so medial, on the medial side में there will be what? Coracoid process. Okay, means a coracoid extension is there. So it is in a small projection, okay, present on the medial aspect of the tuber scapulae, which gives an accommodation to what? Coracobrachialis muscle. Okay, so the tuber scapula gives an accommodation to what? Biceps brachii muscle, and the coracoid process gives an accommodation to what? Coracobrachialis muscle. Right? So this was all about the scapula of the ox or the cattle or buffalo. Okay. Now coming on to the description of the or the species difference. So the very first species is the horse. So I had also mentioned earlier that there is the ratio which is the 1:2 in the case of the horse. Acromion process is absent in the case of the horse. This is a point to note. The tuber scapula is placed slight away or placed away from the glenoid cavity. Okay. The coracoid process is well developed in the case of horse. Deep glenoid cavity is present in the case of the horse, and the subscapular fossa is also quite deeper. Okay, so the peculiarity of how you are going to identify the scapula of the dog is that the ratio of the infraspinous and the supraspinous fossa that are there on the lateral surface is 1:1. Okay, and the second thing is the spine of the scapula is at the middle, right? The acromion process is short, blunt, and extend till the glenoid cavity. It is short, blunt, and extending towards the glenoid cavity. The tuber scapula is also blunt. The point here to note, or the important point, is that the coracoid process is absent in the case of the dog. So how you can easily identify the scapula of a dog is by seeing the presence or the absence of the coracoid process. And the anterior angle is also absent in the case of the dog. These are the points that you should know. Now coming on to the very next point is about the swine. So in the swine, the ratio is 1:0.8. There is a wider spine, move further and backward. There is a rudimentary acromion process, means the acromion process is not that much well developed. The glenoid notch is absent in the case of the swine. Talking about the rabbit, the spine is towards the cranial part. Okay, the spine is towards facing the cranial aspect. The acromion process is broad and backward. Okay, forms a projection called meta-acromion process. This point is important, that the scapula of rabbit bears what? The metaacromion process. How? The acromion process is broad and backward. Okay, it turns backward and forms a small projection known as the metaacromion process. This is one of the points that you should remember about the scapula of the rabbit. Now discussing about the coracoid process, it is well developed in case of the rabbit. So this was all about the scapular bone, and from in the very later coming videos, where we were discussing about more bones like humerus and radius ulna, etc. So this was all about this lecture. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.